So, Prince William and Catherine have officially confirmed that Queen Camilla has been ordered out of Windsor Lodge. The way this unfolded is far stranger than most realize. For weeks, Camilla acted as if the property was hers permanently, moving beyond simple occupancy to assume full ownership rights. She approved expensive renovations, dismissed long-serving staff, restricted family access, and presented the arrangement to guests as if King Charles had handed her the deeds. Initially, no one pushed back, and that silence emboldened her. However, Catherine noticed something highly specific that Camilla likely believed would go unseen. Several personal items connected to Queen Elizabeth and Princess Diana had vanished from their usual display rooms. These priceless artifacts weren't simply lost. They had been meticulously wrapped, labeled, and moved into storage under direct instructions tracing back to Camilla's private office. Crucially, Prince William never approved this removal, and Catherine was never consulted. The wider family remained unaware until a terrified staff member finally broke ranks and disclosed the situation to the Waleses. That single disclosure changed everything. What initially appeared to be simple redecorating suddenly looked like a calculated attempt to erase the historical identity of Windsor Lodge and replace it with Camilla's unilateral authority. Portraits were moved, guest rooms were reassigned, and long-standing family arrangements were canceled without explanation. Staff who dared to question these sweeping orders were coldly told that the residents now answered exclusively to the Queen. Instead of exploding in anger, Catherine took a highly effective, methodical approach. She quietly requested the administrative records. A flood of documentation arrived on her desk: massive storage lists, expensive renovation requests, restrictive access instructions, and formal written objections from concerned household administrators. One specific warning explicitly stated that certain protected objects could not be moved without family approval. Camilla's office officially received that warning, yet the illicit move proceeded anyway. This is when Prince William got directly involved. He discovered that one specific sealed box in storage contained an item intimately connected to his mother, Diana, an artifact he firmly believed was protected from removal without his direct knowledge. For William, this instantly escalated from a disagreement over furniture to a direct challenge to family memory, palace procedure, and the limits of Camilla's growing power. He demanded to know who gave the final order. The paper trail bypassed junior aides entirely, leading straight through Camilla's private office, actively ignoring two separate written objections and revealing a chain of command that treated Windsor Lodge as her personal, unassailable territory. The situation grew even messier and legally dangerous when it was discovered that official royal resources had been used to pay for extensive structural changes that were never formally approved. This financial revelation placed Camilla in a precarious position she couldn't explain away with royal status. Despite the mounting evidence, Catherine initially tried to keep the scandal from becoming public. She sent a private diplomatic message asking Camilla to restore the removed items, reverse the access restrictions, and pause the renovations until the family could review everything together. Camilla's response was reportedly cold and dismissive. She haughtily stated that Windsor Lodge now fell under her authority and suggested Catherine focus on her own household. That arrogant reply inflicted more damage than Camilla realized. Catherine had approached her privately to avoid humiliating King Charles and dividing the family. Instead of stepping back, Camilla doubled down on her power grab. Within days, more staff were reassigned, another family visit was canceled, and new instructions officially described the lodge as Camilla's permanent residence. However, claiming permanence requires legal proof. When William demanded the original occupancy documents, palace officials expected to find a signed grant, a lease amendment, or a written order from Charles. They found none. Instead, they uncovered a highly conditional arrangement, one dependent on continuing family approval and strictly proper use of the historic property. Buried inside the dense legal wording was a fatal clause Camilla's office had apparently never read. If the property, staff, or royal resources were misused, the entire living arrangement could be instantly withdrawn. By the end of that evening, William and Catherine were no longer asking whether Camilla had gone too far. They were preparing to legally prove she had. Catherine meticulously compiled every ignored warning, illicit invoice, storage list, and canceled access notice into one undeniable file. William ordered a full, sweeping internal review of the estate's management. While Camilla continued acting untouchable, palace officials were already examining the exact clause that could legally remove the residence from her control. Catherine's first instinct wasn't retaliation, but strategic containment. Knowing how quickly a private dispute could become a public spectacle and trap Charles in the middle, she chose the quiet route. She requested a highly private conversation away from staff and cameras. During the brief meeting, she raised the issue of the missing belongings first, explaining that objects tied to Queen Elizabeth and Princess Diana had been moved without consultation and that staff changes were affecting family access. She simply asked for the removals to be paused until a review could be conducted. Camilla did not retreat. She responded with absolute confidence, reiterating that Windsor Lodge fell under her authority and that the staffing and renovation decisions were hers alone. She essentially warned Catherine to step back, but Catherine refused to back down. Over the next few days, restrictions tightened further. Family visits were canceled, loyal employees were placed under review, and guest suites were reassigned for Camilla's private visitors. Unfamiliar aides began aggressively checking names at the entrance. The message was unmistakable. Camilla was aggressively building absolute control. The atmosphere inside the house became incredibly tense. Staff stopped speaking openly, and instructions arrived verbally or through private messages that vanished from official channels. While some workers obeyed out of fear, others quietly began saving copies of the illicit orders. Catherine did the same, meticulously recording every canceled arrangement, staffing change, and denied access request. The most damning detail emerged when a former staff member revealed that the expensive renovations weren't funded solely through Camilla's private accounts. Official invoices showed that restricted royal household resources had been used for major structural alterations that never received full committee approval. Massive payments had been cleverly attached to broad maintenance codes to avoid audit attention. Staff assigned to official state duties were illegally redirected to support Camilla's private arrangements. This was no longer a question of taste. It was a matter of misappropriated funds and stolen authority. When shown the financial records, William didn't react with explosive anger. He became terrifyingly quiet, reading every page and asking precisely who had approved the illicit payments, reassigned the royal staff, and authorized the storage of items linked to Diana. Every answer led back to Camilla's office. William then formally requested the original, binding papers governing Windsor Lodge. At first, Camilla's inner circle assumed the review would confirm her claims of broad control granted by Charles. However, an archivist found the devastating line detailing the conditional family arrangement. The clause explicitly concerned gross misuse, unauthorized spending, restricted access, and the absolute power to withdraw occupancy if the family property was treated as personal territory. William waited until the residence file had been exhaustively checked against all funding records, staffing orders, and storage instructions. He wanted no gaps in the evidence. When he finally confronted Camilla, he made it clear the discussion was about her conduct. He presented the documents one by one, the canceled visits, reassigned employees, fraudulent renovation charges, access restrictions, and the storage order linked to Diana's belongings. When asked what gave her the right, Camilla answered purely with status, claiming the residence had been placed at her disposal and Charles had no objection to the changes. William completely disagreed, firmly reminding her that Windsor Lodge was not a private reward but carried massive family history, incurred official state costs, housed legally protected objects, and involved complex arrangements. A vague verbal understanding from Charles could not erase strict written legal conditions. Camilla then attempted to leverage Charles, warning that a public dispute would embarrass the king. The threat was clear: back down or be blamed for causing a scene. He continued. William formally ordered a massive, exhaustive review of every decision made since Camilla began treating the lodge as her personal residence. Officials were instructed to examine occupancy, security, staffing, spending, maintenance, guest access, and the removal of belongings. Catherine became the organized center of that review, having preserved all written objections sent by household administrators. One message explicitly asked Camilla's office to delay the transfer of protected family objects. The arrogant response was, "Proceed as instructed." More damning records followed: restricted access lists, memos redirecting rooms for exclusive use, and invoices for unapproved work. The most revealing evidence came from an administrator who attended an earlier planning meeting where Camilla discussed the lodge as though its future was permanently settled in her favor. When asked if permanent authorization had been received, an aide smugly replied that nobody would ever challenge the Queen. By the end of the exhaustive review, officials reached an undeniable legal conclusion. Camilla's position at Windsor Lodge was not protected by legal ownership, a permanent lease, or an unrestricted royal grant. William requested confirmation that the withdrawal clause could be legally enforced without Charles signing a new order or Camilla's consent. The answer was yes. Furthermore, Catherine's file showed Camilla had ignored 3 separate formal warnings before the review began. The palace was no longer deciding if Camilla had innocently misunderstood the arrangement. They were deciding what to do about someone who had been warned, understood the risk, and arrogantly carried on. The file became a devastating map of how Camilla's control had been built decision by decision. Catherine arranged the material in perfect sequence: altered room plans, new staffing schedules, illicit storage records, restrictive security instructions, and fraudulent invoices. One specific photograph drew William's intense attention: a historic sitting room before the alterations began, and a second image days later showing it completely stripped of priceless family pieces, replaced with expensive new furniture and a new portrait. The changes followed a clear design to make the lodge an extension of her private court. Catherine realized Camilla's earlier remark about focusing on her own household reflected a plan already in motion. The strongest evidence came from a brave, long-serving employee who kept a signed document explicitly ordering the immediate removal of several highly protected belongings before the next scheduled family visit. Catherine found the warning attached to it, explicitly stating no transfer should proceed until ownership and family access had been confirmed. Camilla's office knew exactly what they were doing. The atmosphere inside the review team changed. Officials who had previously remained cautious began speaking more directly. Camilla's representatives desperately claimed Charles had given broad verbal permission. Officials meticulously searched for any supporting document but found nothing. Vague words spoken privately could not erase strict conditions accepted in writing. The legal advisors concluded the strict conditions had been broken repeatedly, and the household held the legal power to instantly withdraw the arrangement. William and Catherine approved the next step. A formal legal notice was prepared listing the breaches, ordering all unauthorized work to stop, restoring total control to the household administration, and requiring Camilla's personal staff to leave the residence. The final line demanded the keys be surrendered by a fixed deadline. When the formal notice reached Camilla, the reaction inside Windsor Lodge was immediate and chaotic. Doors slammed closed, frantic calls were made, and an arrogant aide insisted the decision would be reversed before morning by the king. But morning came, and nothing changed. The deadline remained. Palace officials were already coldly preparing massive inventories, access orders, and a comprehensive security plan for the handover. The deadline arrived, and the vehicle pulling through the gates carried 2 senior household officials, a high-level security supervisor, and the inventory team. No photographers waited outside. The palace wanted the humiliating transfer completed quietly. Inside, Camilla's aides frantically packed. One arrogant assistant aggressively demanded to know who had authorized the officials to enter before Camilla had finished speaking with Charles. The cold answer was explicitly contained in the notice. Absolute authority had legally returned to household administration at the deadline. From that moment, no room could be closed to inspection, no item could leave without being checked, and no member of Camilla's private staff could remain. The officials read the terms and began their work with a calm that made the scene infinitely worse for Camilla's team. The incredibly sterile process gave her absolutely nothing dramatic to fight against. The first serious dispute began over a set of valuable silver frames. Her desperate aide loudly insisted they had been personal gifts, but no records were produced, and the frames remained. A massive antique writing desk was next, then two priceless paintings. The unbreakable rule applied. Strictly personal property could leave. Historic family property could not. Room by room, the boundary Camilla had ignored was being restored. William and Catherine were not present, a highly deliberate choice that prevented Camilla from turning the handover into a spectacle. Yet, their absolute authority sat heavily in every document. Camilla furiously entered the entrance hall right before midday, demanding to see the senior official and stating the residence could not be surrendered while her highly private discussions with the king continued. The official coldly replied that any family discussion would not suspend the legal notice. Camilla's restraint finally cracked. She furiously accused Catherine of maliciously engineering the humiliation and accused William of ruthlessly using Diana's memory to punish challengers. The official calmly stated the removal followed repeated, documented breaches involving access, staffing, fraudulent spending, and highly protected family property. No emotional accusation could change the record. Camilla aggressively demanded that one highly private sitting room remain sealed until Charles personally decided its status. Her aides stubbornly produced a separate key and completely refused to place it with the others. The security supervisor carefully checked the formal notice and the full occupancy schedule. Every single room was explicitly listed. There were no private exceptions. The official calmly stated that keeping the key would legally amount to formally refusing to hand over the property, and security would forcefully open the room. Camilla gave a small defeated nod, and the final key was placed on the table. By late afternoon, Camilla's disgraced staff left in quiet stages. The grand entrance hall completely emptied, but the palace still had one massive decision left to make. Panicked advisors desperately wanted no public confirmation of the eviction. William and Catherine entirely disagreed. Absolute silence would leave room for another spun version of events. That evening, they chose their words incredibly carefully. Camilla had formally vacated Windsor Lodge. Her private staff no longer controlled the residence. The keys had been returned, unauthorized work was halted, and household administration had resumed absolute authority. The confirmation traveled quickly. Inside the palace, aides understood this was not a voluntary move, but the direct result of a massive review that exposed how far Camilla had gone. William didn't celebrate. He simply ordered the massive restoration to begin immediately. Staff meticulously identified every object illicitly removed, checking items linked to Diana against William's private records before securely returning them. One specific box, containing the highly personal item that first drew William into the dispute, had been scheduled for imminent transfer elsewhere. Catherine quietly watched the restoration, knowing the outcome was entirely about drawing an unshakable boundary. Shared family property could not be casually claimed, and sacred family memory could not be arrogantly cleared. Long-serving employees who had been removed were contacted, guest arrangements returned to neutral control, and the massive lodge was absolutely no longer an extension of Camilla's private office. The victory came with immense, lasting damage. Charles faced incredibly difficult questions regarding how much he knew about the renovations, the misused funds, and the removal of protected belongings. His deafening silence protected him but did not protect trust. William had harshly learned that family assurances were completely useless without hard proof. Catherine learned that highly private diplomacy could easily be mistaken for weakness. Camilla brutally learned that massive status could delay consequences but could not erase a legally signed condition. The fragile balance inside Windsor violently shifted. Staff demanded written approval for major decisions, and William and Catherine made it clear they would fiercely challenge anyone who arrogantly treated royal tradition as personal property. Camilla's forced departure marked the exact moment her immense authority violently met an absolute limit she simply could not move. Her arrogant beliefs spectacularly failed her. Had she simply paused after receiving the first written warning, the dispute might have quietly ended privately. By the time the formal notice arrived, the ironclad case against her had been entirely built by her own arrogant decisions.